Thanks very much, Mark, for all of the work that Mark's put into this. He briefed the Cabinet yesterday and we're releasing it today really as soon as we could after Mark was able to take the Cabinet through all of the details. This is a really comprehensive and it's a really considered piece of work. It reminds us of the scale of the pandemic, which was a period that altered every aspect of life in Australia for the best part of a couple of years. It was a crisis big enough to push Australia into recession for the first time in almost 3 decades. It did require rapid and extraordinary policy responses, and these had profound short and longer term impacts on the Australian people, but also on their economy. As Mark said, we should be incredibly proud of the remarkable resilience shown by our people, our workers, our businesses, and we owe it to them to learn the important lessons which are clearly and comprehensively detailed in this report that we are releasing today. Now, Mark touched on the health response, but the consequences of the economic policies developed through the pandemic also continue to be felt right across our economy even today. Big decisions were taken and big mistakes were made. Those mistakes were costly and they were inflationary. Now, a big, substantial economic response was warranted by the pandemic. It was essential, but the report says, and I quote, "There was excessive fiscal and monetary policy stimulus provided throughout 2021 and 2022, especially in the construction sector. Combined with supply-side disruptions, this contributed to inflationary pressures coming out of the pandemic." That's on page 17. And the modelling cited in the report says that the extended policy support, which didn't always move in line with the health advice, meant that peak inflation was at least 2 percentage points higher than it could have been. On the design of the economic response, we saw some very good ideas badly implemented and poorly targeted. Labor called for and supported programs like JobKeeper, but we were very, very clear at the time that the support should have been rolled out faster and that it should have been better targeted, because if it was better targeted, we could have provided more assistance to those who genuinely needed it by wasting less on the businesses in particular who didn't need JobKeeper, and we know subsequently that billions and billions of dollars were wasted. The views that we made public and clear at the time have been vindicated by this report. On JobKeeper, it says that the exclusions made it less effective, disproportionately impacted women and casual workers, including in the care economy, early childhood education, in universities, and also for workers in aviation, at the same time as JobKeeper overcompensated some businesses, which resulted in a lot of waste. The lack of planning, the delayed rollout and the design choices of JobKeeper exacerbated skills shortages and inflationary pressures in our economy. On the home builder program, the report makes it clear that that overheated the industry and contributed to inflation in the post-pandemic era, with many Australians experiencing the consequences of this now through higher inflation and through lack of access to housing. It's also particularly critical of the early release of superannuation, which was not an appropriate policy response and shouldn't be deployed again. They see the existing hardship provisions as sufficient for these kinds of events. It also concludes that the slow vaccine rollout had economic consequences as well. It delayed the reopening of our economy by months at great cost to the economy. And overall, it highlights poorly targeted policies which contributed to Australia's post-pandemic inflation and the dramatic decline in real wages growth, which we've now started to turn around. Now, we know that global supply shocks are a big part of the inflationary challenges and pressures in our own economy, but that was compounded by some poor policy choices during the pandemic and its immediate aftermath. And this was made worse by the Coalition's budget in March of 2022, which was more stimulatory than necessary. At a time of high and rising inflation, the Coalition's final budget had around $40 billion in net policy spending, no savings measures and it banked much less revenue than we have been banking. In contrast, since then, we've delivered back-to-back surpluses. We've found almost $80 billion in savings, and we've returned 82% of revenue upgrades to the budget. When we came to office, inflation was much higher and rising. Now it is lower and falling. We inherited inflation with a 6 in front of it. We've halved that, and we've got real wages growing again. And we'll know more about that tomorrow when we get the September quarter CPI. But the conclusions in this report and the progress that we've made since COVID are proof of why our responsible economic management is so important. We've focused on fighting inflation, delivering responsible cost of living relief and repairing the budget without ignoring the risks to growth.